All right, good afternoon. Glad everyone is here today. Thank you for coming. I think we had about a week's notice, but I appreciate everyone being here today. My name's Andy Welch. I'm currently chair of the Public Safety Subcommittee on Appropriations. We'll see how assignments come out after this. Thanks to the members for being here today. We are going to just take up a measure that I've drafted, LC 297216. This is mostly for informational purposes, to have the GBI explain what is referred to as a wrap back program, and I'll have them explain a little bit more about that. But the legislation is up there in the corner by the podium. If you don't have a copy, I don't know that I have enough copies for everyone, but hopefully you'll be able to share. It's just a short 2-pager. Just as a preliminary overview, though, the legislation would enable the GBI to keep and maintain fingerprints of those that seek employment with the state or various agencies of the state or subsidiaries of the state. And once those fingerprints are taken, they can be utilized to maintain the ongoing criminal status of the individuals and report back to the agencies to determine whether or not they should maintain employment. One of the central questions we're going to be looking for today is to know from your agencies how often it is that you, first of all, what your statutory authority is for taking fingerprints. If you have that, then we want to make sure we're aware of that. The number two is how regular do you call for them to be re-fingerprinted for renewal of employment or contracts? This could be contracts with outside vendors, so it could be with a child care provider, a child care institution that has employees. It could be with foster parents, et cetera. So there's others that play outside of the state, if you will, direct employment, and we need to look at that. I believe renewal for child care providers is 3 years, every 3 years, but that's just an example. So with that, what I'll ask for us to do is we have a PowerPoint presentation. I'll ask Don Diedrich, attorney for the GBI, to come forward, and also Selena Norris, if you would come up and grab a seat at the mic. And as we do this, if you'll come to the, that'll work for you. And then after Dawn has gone through her presentation from GBI, what I'll ask her to do is come to the table, and then as your agencies can come up and speak to us about what it is that you do, if you'll use the podium there to let us know, and so that the public can hear this. And with that, I really do appreciate the work that the GBI has done. Neil Gertzenberger is here. Appreciate you being here, sir. And also Terry Fisher, thank you for being here with the GBI. With that, I'll turn this over to Dawn and let her start. And I hope this is going to work for us. Last time we tried this, it did not, but we'll try it this time. So go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here and have the opportunity to give you an overview of the Wrap Back program. What we need to start with is a little bit of history. In the past, criminal history record information, which begins with an arrest, was gathered and maintained for law enforcement purposes. That is the original use of criminal history record. The way a record starts that is maintained by the Georgia Crime Information Center is with an arrest, and at the time of arrest, individuals are fingerprinted. Under Georgia law, all individuals charged with a felony and misdemeanors designated by the Attorney General are fingerprintable offenses. So law enforcement submits those fingerprints, and that creates a record. So we have a biometric piece, which is the fingerprints, as well as the biographical data that is given to law enforcement at the time. But the reality is we know who was arrested. Now what is being done is, in addition to the use of criminal history records of arrests, as well as the subsequent information regarding the prosecution, that information is being used to make decisions for non-criminal justice use for licensing and employment. And this is a good thing. So what we've seen over recent years is the increase in the number of fingerprints submitted for criminal justice purposes. Those are for arrests, and then also the fingerprints submitted for what we call applicant or non-criminal justice uses. Now, one thing that's significant, as Representative Welsh alluded to, is the Georgia Crime Information does not have the statutory authority to maintain the fingerprints that are submitted for a non-criminal justice purpose. the law only permits GCIC to maintain the criminal history fingerprints for individuals who were arrested for one of the crimes that was designated a misdemeanor or all felonies. So that's what's significant here today, is that's the basic authorization that is needed in order for GCIC to continue to maintain these prints. And once they're maintained on file, they would be maintained separately in a separate database. The reason for these fingerprints, as I mentioned, was for licensing and employment, to enhance the public safety, particularly for vulnerable populations. So you'll see that many of the agencies who've come at Representative Welch's request are responsible for ensuring the safety of our vulnerable populations: young people, early childhood education, elderly people, people with behavioral health issues who are vulnerable to being preyed on by individuals who may have an interest in doing that. In addition, you also have agencies that have to safeguard for financial losses, such as the Insurance Commission and banking. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has created this RAP back program, and RAP, just in case you didn't know, that's what we call the RAP sheet, and it's the Report of Arrests and Prosecutions. RAP back is what it will do is, assuming GCIC is able to maintain the applicant prints. So let's take a teacher. In order to be licensed as a teacher by the state of Georgia, the Board of Education and/or the Professional Standards Commission has the authority under state and federal law to have a state and national criminal history check done of that applicant by the submission of their fingerprints. So you want to become a teacher, your fingerprints are submitted for this check of to see if you have a RAP sheet. And then the individual continues on in their career, but the RAP back would give the authority, the ability for the employer or the licensing agency to know that the individual has been arrested either in Georgia or somewhere else. It's going to require that statutory authority and then enrollment by the agency or the employer, and the validation by the agency that the applicant is still actively employed or licensed. And what that means is that's the third step when that record, if RAP back passes, if the authority is granted to GCIC, if agencies sign up for it, agencies that do have the statutory authority, then the last step, if someone is arrested, if a teacher is arrested in another state, is there would be some sort of message that GCIC would send to ensure that that person was still either employed or licensed. So that's the basic how it will work. It doesn't provide any new authority, so it is important that when we're talking about the universe of agencies that may enroll, those are the agencies that do have the statutory authority. And at this point, it wouldn't allow for multiple sets of fingerprints to be submitted. There would have to be an individual subscription by each agency. And this is a schematic showing the general concept. On the upper part of the diagram, you see the way it works to get your fingerprints taken for licensing or employment. And you'll notice there it says GAPS, Georgia Applicant Print Service. This is something that the GBI put up and running, I think probably 2009, 2007. And this enables throughout the state of Georgia individuals to go and have their fingerprints taken, and then they're submitted. And they indicate what agency or what employer they are being licensed for. And then that information, that criminal history record, the fingerprints are submitted and searched through GBI as well as the FBI, and then the results go back to the agency or the employer. The way RAPBAC will work is those fingerprints will be retained by us, those applicant prints, non-criminal justice. So if someone has never been arrested in their life, once they've submitted their prints under RAPBAC, and they'll be told at the time of doing this, their prints will be maintained by the GBI for this purpose. Now, they will be in a separate database from the criminal database. They will be kept separate and distinct. But if they are arrested, whether it's in Georgia or another state, then that fact will come, that information will come back to the agency or the employer that's licensing them. This, of course, obviously is going to enhance public safety. If someone has been fingerprinted and has successfully passed a background to be a bus driver for a school, if they get arrested in Alabama, that's of significant interest. Likewise, if someone is arrested in another state or in another county and they're providing for child molestation or something like that, and they're providing care to a child, that's a significant event. So that's the advantage, the benefit for the use of the wrap back. And then this was the point, Chairman Welch, that you wanted us to cover. Each individual agency or employer has to have authority. And the reason for that is federal law, we refer to it as Public Law 92-544, requires that the state pass legislation authorizing the receipt of the federal criminal history record information from the other states, the other 49 states. And that legislation, we work with y'all whenever an agency wants to pass that sort of legislation. Neil Gerstenberger liaisons with the FBI CJIS unit, and we send it up there for review, and then it moves forward. But it has to meet these requirements of federal law. And then this is a list. We've got 2 slides that have a list of the particular agencies and their statutes. These are what we call the 92-544 statutes. On this particular slide, we have highlighted Department of Human Services, and if someone is here and I get it wrong, please tell me. But it's my understanding that for foster parents, which is one statutory authorization, that criminal history check has to be done within, is it 5 years, Selena? Every 5 years, as opposed to the employees of the child care agencies, the centers, that's just a one-time check. So wrap back, in theory, someone could continue working, and if there was never another criminal history, the employer or the agency would not know that they had been arrested, particularly if it occurs somewhere else. And then looking down at the Secretary of State's office, for example, nurses, the background check is done at the beginning of them seeking licensing in the state of Georgia. This is the other slide that lists the agencies that currently have the statutory authority to submit the fingerprints for the national check. And then 2 other things we just wanted to make the committee aware of is that we have a statute of federal law that's called the National Child Protection Act and Volunteers for Children Act. And this does allow an entity that's doing volunteer work, so your recreation center programs, can do the national criminal history check. However, the results have to go back to a governmental agency and who would make the fitness determination. And then with the Adam Walsh Act, with the passage of that, there is the ability to use that to submit fingerprints and receive the information nationally for the private schools and child welfare agencies. Any questions related to that?
Just a few questions. So by maintaining the database, it would,
Yes, sir.
the statutory language, it says, and on line 18, that it has to be maintained securely and separately from records relating to the identification of criminals. So this would be a separate, distinct database of fingerprints, and it would be separate from any from criminal activities in the criminal record and history. Could you just elaborate a little bit on the need to keep them separate and then the security that will be there for the database?
Right. So both databases are going to have the same amount of security in terms of GTA and the servers, and we have federal laws that govern and the CJIS policy as well as our own Georgia Technology Authority. So that would be the same, but we did want to keep these 2 databases separate and segregated because we did not want any possibility of cross-population. The criminal information for the criminal rap sheet is one thing versus the applicant's prints. Those are maintained separate and distinct. Now, you may have an individual who is licensed to work, let's think, so maybe a crime like, it's hard to pick a crime that, I don't want to say a crime that doesn't matter. That's not what I want to say. But I'm trying to think of a crime that is, let's say, a bad check. 5 years ago, misdemeanor, bad check, and the individual is licensed as a nurse. So that particular individual would have prints in both databases once the prints are submitted. But we didn't want them joining because from a privacy standpoint, security, and all of that. But we're going to build each one of these. When we build the applicant one, if there is authorization for that, it will have the same technical security standards. And let me just ask Terry, I haven't missed anything there, have I? Terry Fisher, before she was our deputy director, she was in charge of bringing all these programs up and running. So,
And this will allow then for the employee to submit a fingerprints one time as opposed to having, well, let's correct that.
yes, sir.
It will afford the opportunity for that to be the case. It depends on whether the agency decides, whatever the agency's policies become, whether they want to do it on a regular
Right.
basis or not, if they subscribe
Yes.
to this, to the wrap back program or the service through the GCIC, then that agency then will have real-time, up-to-date data on the activities, the criminal activities of an employee. Now, whether or not that particular activity raises to the level of some repercussions within the agency and associated employment will be up to whatever the agency policies set that. So if a bad check may not deal with, endangerment of human lives or with children and those kinds of things, so that there could be a distinction made by the agency, but that is something that each agency would set as their own policies. Is that correct?
Right, and for some of these agencies, it is statutory. So the statute describes what the fitness standards are to have that license.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of criminal justice employment for the GBI, we have a policy where we say what criminal history things are not acceptable, and sometimes it's how long ago it was.
Okay.
But you're correct.
Okay, so it'll be statutorily, and if not statutorily, internal policy.
Yes, sir.
Chairman Powell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask a couple of questions. If we develop this secondary wrap non-criminal fingerprint system, and let me just use a couple of examples maybe. Right now, you have a lot of people, then we submit people who want a concealed weapons permit. Then this would be part of the wrap program.
It could be. If the probate courts subscribe to it, absolutely.
All right.
And
Second question is, if this is non-criminal, then it would be branded as to what agency or for what purpose that they had submitted their fingerprints.
Yes, sir. So that's an excellent point. So nobody is going to know about this other than the agency or employer that has subscribed because they have the statutory authority to do so.
So then by that, we would actually be building a database on people who have submitted for a concealed weapons permit.
Oh, no, we don't have to do that. I said if that was authorized, and I don't know if Georgia Carey's in the room, but I suspect there are many interests that would be opposed to that. And right now, the GBI, we have no database whatsoever that reflects firearms carry license applications, which are done by the probate courts here in Georgia, and that information goes through to the NICS check as well as through our databases.
So under this program, if you submitted your fingerprints for this concealed weapons permit, so like a real estate license or an insurance agent's license and these things, so it wouldn't be a tag put on this that for this is the purpose?
No, there would have to be statutory authorization to retain those prints.
For example, whenever we retain the prints, we're not retaining the prints and tagging them to say this was a pistol permit, this was for daycare. All of those are going into a central database for just non-criminal justice purposes. We don't know at that point in time, when looking at the prints, what they submitted for.
So it wouldn't be a categorical
No.
database
No.
on the different licensures of whatever.
Our automated fingerprint identification system, what we call AFIS, is the ones that will retain those prints simply for the comparison against arrest prints. So those fingerprints are being retained for comparison purposes only. There is no tag associated with that. So if you've submitted your fingerprints to be a school teacher and for a weapons carry permit, your fingerprints are only going to be in there one time.
Under your name and social.
Right. the best of those two prints. We don't even care about social as much. We're looking at the biometrics at that point. None of your demographic type data is associated with that.
But Ms. Norris, that would only apply, though, if the statutory authority was there for those particular fingerprints to be maintained by GCIC. And
Correct.
currently, there is no authority for the maintenance of those
That's
fingerprints.
correct.
It's a one-time check when you get your carry permit.
Second question, please. Have y'all put a price tag on this program?
We've got $500,000 in the information, and then do we have an updated number?
Not yet. That is for the application development, and we also have personnel costs associated with it too.
Any idea what we're talking about to implement this program?
Probably about I think we had 313,000 in personnel costs as ongoing years out. And then, like I said, right now we don't have a firm estimate from our vendor, but it will be no more than probably $500,000. It could be less.
$800 to $1 million.
With no additional cost to the individuals, the applicants.
Yeah, the way I read the report was that it was $500,000 startup, and then it would be an ongoing maintenance of $300,000.
That was for personnel costs.
Personnel cost, okay. So the initial, you're approximating the initial cost will be the 500 plus the 300, so 800,000.
Yeah.
Okay, and then from there on, it would be the 300,000 annually. I know that the bill that you have before you, or at least the draft legislation that you have before you, for members of the committee and members of the public, all this does is authorize the GBI and GCIC to maintain those prints, those non-criminal prints. So that's all this legislation would do, and it has been submitted for fiscal notes, so we'll get that back, and we'll let the appropriate committee members have that when we have it. Other questions, Chairman?
No.
Other questions from members of the committee? With that, what I'd like to do is, at this time, it would be helpful to us to hear from each of the agencies that are here that you already are collecting criminal history or fingerprints for employment purposes or contracting purposes or licensing purposes. It would be helpful for the committee to know what the time frame for renewal of those fingerprints or a resubmission of those prints is currently. And from that, that'll help us give us a spacing. A concern that has arisen is that if you are an agency that is in, let's just say, in the business of supervising children, and your employees are only having to submit for background checks with their fingerprints. Now, there's obviously biographical information that can be used, but the biometric of a fingerprint, if that's not being done on a period of, a year to 3 years to 5 years, then that obviously leaves for a significant gap for when an employee may have engaged in some activities outside of the state or even within the state that does not come up on your radar screen as an agency employer. So in part, this is to enhance the ability to protect children, those that are vulnerable, whether it be elderly, special needs individuals, nurses in terms of administering and overseeing medication, and their patients. So you can see so it's a very broad implication for ensuring that the state is looking after the best interests of those that are vulnerable and that are in the care of the state, and ensuring that the people that are administering that care have not engaged in an activity that I think the public would perceive to have been inconsistent with their current profession. So if they're providing child care services and they've been picked up in another state for child pornography, that information should be readily available to the agency to know that and to take whatever appropriate steps are necessary to protect the children under that individual supervision, just as an example. So with that, what we'll have to do is if you've signed up to speak, and I think we had a sign-up sheet up there, but I'm not sure people have signed up. I'm sorry. Okay, if you have I know that I've seen some individuals here, Ms. Crittenden's here, and Mr. Cagle has come in. Other members have joined us. If you wouldn't mind just coming forward to speak at the podium and to let us know again the time frame it is for having individuals licensed, renewing their fingerprints. If you could share that with us, that would be helpful. Commissioners, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Robin Crittenden, and I'm Commissioner of the Department of Human Services, and I'm joined here by Director Cagle. He's the Director of the Division of Family and Children's Services, or DFACS. DHS conducts over 30,000 fingerprint checks for employees, contractors, placement resources, et cetera, roughly every year. Last year it was 30,461 for calendar year 16, but that's a pretty standard number in terms of what we do. The timelines for when we do them really vary, and we'd be happy, I think Director Cagle has some, but we'd be happy to provide you those specifically for the different categories if you'd like those at a later time. But for us, the other part of this that I think is key, Director Cagle will talk about it in connection with child welfare, but we also have adult protective services workers that it's their backgrounds and their criminal backgrounds are key. It'll also help us when we have employees that are promoted or moved into different positions. We redo their background checks on this time, and having this information available and not having to do those will eliminate us having to do that. So just to give you all some perspective as to the kinds of background checks that we do and what we would use this for.
Does the agency, Commissioner, I'm sorry, does the agency then have to pay GCIC for that background check? Does the agency itself cover the cost of that, or does it require the employee to pay for it?
We cover the cost of that.
And it's about, was it $52? Is that the approximate cost for doing a fingerprint background check?
Correct.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Bobby Cagle, the Director of the Division of Family and Children's Services. This is one of the things that we do that is the primary basis for us determining whether a person is appropriate for being a foster parent in particular. We conducted 13,972 checks last year for all placement types. That means relatives and fictive kin as well as foster parents. Then we also conducted 472 fingerprint checks for foster home renewals. The requirement under federal and state law is that the foster homes be checked every 5 years. And then our employees comprise the biggest portion also of the employees of the Department of Human Services. We have about 9,000 overall employees. DFACS has about 7,000 of those. And for all staff, we conducted 1,726 fingerprint checks for calendar year 16. The gap that this is going to be covering for us, of course, I think in terms of foster parents is that I have seen in my 28-year career foster parents who get the 5-year check and they've had subsequent offenses that occurred just after they were checked initially, and we were not aware of those, and they continued to provide care for children until the 5-year check came up. So we had a considerable exposure for the safety of that child. We also do not currently do routine rechecks on employees. So the 7,000 employees that we have around the state include both economic services employees as well as those that deal with child protective services and foster care. And if you think about that, of course, it's pretty obvious the need to have those checked that work with children directly. But the economic services staff also deal with a lot of very sensitive information and really need those checks to make sure that we don't have somebody who has a history of financial related crimes because they would have the kind of information in that position that would allow them to commit those crimes if they so desired. So we're very supportive of this. We think it fills gaps that we've all known have been there for a very long time.
Thank you, Director and Commissioner. Appreciate that very much. Other folks. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Welch. Bo Fears, representing the Department of Banking and Finance. The department runs background checks on a number of licensees in the mortgage industry, particularly mortgage loan originators, as well as in the money service business industry. Statutorily, there's not a set time frame to run and we do have very broad authority. Occasionally, we will run rechecks when as part of our investigations, we think there might be an issue. One little caveat is as it relates to mortgage loan originators and also money service businesses. Federal law was recently changed to enable the department to have direct access through FBI information through the nationwide multi-state licensing system and registry, and that is how we obtain that information. And effectively, we have wrap back right now. NMLS, we are notified if there has been an arrest or other change to anyone's criminal history immediately.
Is that, so maybe I'll have to ask our folks from GBI if that, Ms. Norris or Ms. Dietrich, could you explain a little bit about the two so that we understand the difference and the availability, if you will, for other state agencies to engage in that kind of information versus something else?
The reason why Department of Banking and Finance has direct access to the federal government's information, they do not come through GCIC for that particular category of applicant.
Okay.
None of our other state agencies has that type of applicant where they could do that. They would have to come through GCIC to get that information.
So in other words, there's already federal authorization
Right.
for them to, with those applications, with those individual lenders, they can already go through, by federal law, go through and see the FBI's background.
Right. There are very few agencies in the state of Georgia that can go directly to the FBI, Banking and Finance being one of those. TSA, for example, is another one. The Army, military-type organizations go directly to the feds and do not come through the state bureaus.
Okay.
And that is a result of federal law that was passed last year.
Okay, thank you both. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, ma'am, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman. I'm Lindsay Scott with the Insurance Commissioner's Office. We license over 200,000 agents in the state, insurance agents in the state of Georgia, and we do have a fingerprint requirement. It's my understanding that we do, I think 3323 5.1 was enacted back in 2009, and that is, we do participate in the Wrap Back program.
We don't have, we don't have that currently, but that gives you authorization to
I'm
collect
sorry.
fingerprints. Is that
Yes,
correct? Okay.
that's correct. We do have the authorization in our statute to collect fingerprints. I believe that our statute, though, does say we can only hold on to those for a year. And I think 5.1, though, gives us the ability to, as I was reading it today, or we will be notified if an individual agent is convicted of a crime, if I'm understanding it correctly. This is fairly new to me, so forgive me.
Oh, no, that's fine, Ms. Scott. We're all kind of learning. That's what this is hearings for. Would you like to comment, Ms. Norris?
I don't know of any subsequent arrest information that's going back to the Office of the Insurance Commissioner at this time.
Okay.
Okay, Neil is shaking his head as well. Okay, but I think it may be, and without reading it myself, I think what we're seeing is that you'll have authority to collect the fingerprints, and then it may be that's an annual renewal or a recheck, and it may be in the discretion of the commissioners to whether that's done or not. Not dissimilar than what the banking industry just revealed to us about if they have an investigation, they may also go into a recheck. So maybe that's
I
it.
believe so, yes. I think
Okay.
that's what it says in the code, as a matter of fact.
Okay, so you said you had
200,000.
200,000.
Insurance agents, yes, sir.
And statutorily, we're requiring a fingerprint background check for them to be licensed?
The background check is by statute. The fingerprint requirement is detailed in the regulation.
Okay, and what was that code section again, 33?
3323-5.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Anything else?
No, sir, that's it.
Now, let me ask this question about the cost. Who pays for those? I guess it's the agents as an applicant,
Yes.
they would pay for their own background
That's
check.
correct,
So
yes,
there
sir.
wouldn't be a savings to the agency then?
Not that I'm aware of. No, they are responsible for covering that cost.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, if y'all have questions, just let me know, okay? I'm kind of roll through them quickly. Yes, come on forward, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Ray Higgins with the Department of Early Care and Learning. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Finance and Administration. I also have with me in the audience today our Chief Legal Officer, who also oversees our Criminal Records Unit. We do have the statutory authority to do this. One of our main functions is to license and regulate the child care centers throughout the state. That's approximately 5,000 facilities across Georgia. We do around 25 to 30,000 of these checks each year. That's based on last calendar year. In the child care setting, those employees, prior to being able to be employed in a child care center and be there present while children are there for care, they have to go and receive a satisfactory background check. That's prior to employment, and then as the current law reads, that would be a recheck every 5 years. And in our case, we do the same thing for our employees, and we bear that cost, but that's relatively small in the grand scheme of things. The large number is out in the field working in the child care centers, and that is between the private center and the applicant, and probably in most cases it would be borne by the applicant. And with that, we greatly appreciate the concept and happy to work with you.
Deputy Commissioner, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate that. And thank you to your legal counsel that joined you. If you have, would you let us know what the code section is? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, 20-1A-30.
20
1A-30 et sec.
Get that Latin in there. That's good. Okay. Yes, Mr. Brantley, how are you, Director?
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So at Department of Driver Services, we have really, I'd say, two groups of people. One is our employees. When they come on to employment, we fingerprint, and that is a live scan that we don't hang on to. Obviously, we run that through GCIC. And then the second group is there's a few different code sections here, but first of all is the risk reduction and defensive driving schools and teachers. That's in 40-5-82. So these are the folks that are doing the DUI schools for folks who unfortunately run into that program. We got the for-hire, taxis, limos, Uber, Lyft, those guys. That's 40-5-39. We got interlock ignition device providers and installers, and that's in 43-12-4 and 43-12-6. And then driver training, school owners and instructors. So this is for our youngsters that are coming through and getting driver training, and that's 43-13-4 and -5. Those, all the second group, that all those, what we call our regulatory compliance group, those are all on a 4-year basis, and so their term is good for 4 years, and it's up to them to come back and get re-fingerprinted and have their term redone every 4 years. So we would not know theoretically in that 4-year period whether or not something had happened until they come back over that 4-year period.
And out of those that you mentioned, they seem like all applicants that would be applying for a license.
That's right. Yeah, they can go to any one of the scan centers that GBI has around the state. So it's very convenient for them, and they bear the burden. The employees part is very important to us. I mean, obviously we're dealing with personal information, and so this kind of program that would alert us to those kind of issues would certainly be interesting to DDS as well, given the sensitivity of information that we have. So
and DDS is going to receive in, as we have learned very recently, with the multiple forms of ID that come through to now secure your driver's license.
That's right.
So you're receiving Social Security numbers, passports, other forms of identification, and you're retaining copies of that. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So then your employees, in terms of maintaining a level of security and knowing that information isn't being stolen and then utilized criminally. Yeah,
and the quick clarification, the employees, nobody has access to it once it's scanned, so
Okay.
it's just that initial presentation of those documents is the only chance they have for access to that. Once it's scanned, the employees don't have the ability to access any of those documents from
Very
there
good.
forward. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so then how often do you recheck your employees?
So we have, in the past year, we have started to develop a policy where we will check not only these kind of issues, but also driving histories. We have people who are out in cars with applicants who are taking road tests. So at current, we do not do a regular check of employees, but that is subject to change as soon as we get our policy in place, which should be, I would say, in the next 6 months. Okay. So there'll be a regular check, both on driver history and on and criminal background as well.
And would the agency itself pay for those employee checks?
We would, yes.
Okay, and how many employees do you have?
1,003, well, that's counting contractors, so 925 actual DDS employees, not counting contractors.
Okay. Thank you, Director.
All
I
right,
appreciate
thanks.
it. Oh, I'm sorry. Chairman Powell has a question for you, Mr. Bradley.
Thank you, Bert. You mentioned y'all do the fingerprints for the for-hire attachments.
Yes, sir.
Taxis, limos, but you also specifically mentioned the ride transportation drivers. If I'm not sure, y'all don't do the fingerprints on those, do you?
So they have a choice. They can either go through a background check with their company that they are employed by, or they can come through us and get what is essentially a standard background check that would apply to any of those transportation companies. And we've got, what's the number? We got 5,000 or so drivers in that have come through that system. So they don't come to us to get fingerprinted. They go to one of the centers, not the DDS centers, but one of the GBI locations to get.
Specifically, my question would be, these ride transportation companies that have opted out to the provision that the companies send it in. So how would this affect their business of keeping their fingerprint files on perpetually?
Well, I mean, I assume this would only apply to those that choose to come get the for-hire endorsement on their license, right? So the ones that choose to stay within their company's background check process would not be affected. This would only be the ones who choose to come in. And most of those that we're seeing are ones that want to drive multiple. They want to drive for limos, taxis, buses. They want to, they want that for-hire endorsement on their license, so they have multiple options. So if you're just driving for one company, you're very likely to only go through that company's background process. But if you want the ability to go across companies and work for multiple, then you come through our process and get that for-hire.
Currently, those drivers that go through the company, they don't have a for-hire attachment.
That's correct.
They don't.
That's correct.
And so
Yes.
if you're looking at whether or not to maintain a license for either the for-hire or the others, in order to maintain that certification, if an employee did come across with a criminal background history, so as real-time GCIC with the Rat Back program notifies DDS that you have a licensee that now has either employee or the licensee, him or herself, actually has now had a hit for a DUI, then your agency could be alerted to that fact, and that could be grounds for revocation of that license.
Well, so for a DUI, that would be, they go through the normal DUI process, right? So it's important to remember the for-hire endorsement is just on your it's just a license feature on your driver's license. So any DUI would come back to us from the court and would result in whatever, punishment is due to you because of your DUI. So it would be essentially attached to your driver's license for those specific folks. If you're talking about the other folks who like the owners or teachers in a DUI school, then yeah, we could revoke that license if it came back. If we had, to your point earlier, if we had the policy that any kind of a violation resulted in a revocation. So two different things where you're talking about a driver's license, a for-hire that's endorsed on your license versus just a regulated industry that we have within our Reg Comp division.
I don't know why Chairman Powell knows so much about for-hire.
He is the
As a
expert in
follow-up
this field.
question to that, since I do seem to know so much about it, can you tell me that under our current statutes, that when these companies that have thousands of drivers that are out there driving to the public in the state of Georgia, do they participate in a Rat Back program of their own, that they know whenever their drivers have been convicted of a crime or a DUI
right.
or such?
Yeah, so a whole separate process that we have. The Georgia Technology Authority enables insurance companies to check the driver histories of drivers that are both insured and employed with companies like this. So it's very likely that they are checking the driver history of their employees every 6 months or every year. And there's actually some programs now where it's more of a real-time basis. So, but I don't want to speak for them, but I don't think there's any kind of criminal non-driving related check that's being going on. But there's a constant monitoring of the motor vehicle status of both employees and drivers for some of these large companies.
If I remember how the process works, y'all are authorized to audit these these databases that they send y'all on drivers and such, have y'all been able to pick up? And I presume y'all are auditing some of them periodically?
I'm going to cut my eyes over to Mike and see if he gives me a yes or a no. I don't,
I can't say for sure.
yeah, I have not heard that, but that's something we can go back and ask. That's not something that has been
So I
discussed.
guess what we're saying is that once y'all get a database of drivers for these companies that they have guaranteed that are of good character with no felons and a good clean driving record, unless they do that check, it's not being done.
Yeah, so they don't submit a database to us. I mean, the state has a database of your driving history right on the mainframe. So that information is used by insurance companies to check that MVR. So we don't house any kind of a database of those drivers. It's a check against the state's mainframe database of all, and they just check them to see if there's any hits to whether it's been driving, but it's all driving related. It's driving focused. It's not criminal.
So really the only ones that y'all really have an authorization on DUIs would be the ones that have the for hire
Yes,
attachment,
that's exactly
which would
right.
be limos, taxis, and those that might wish to participate in a true background check.
That's right. Yes, sir.
And also, just to make sure we're clear on the distinction here, the report back will be to a governmental agency, so that the federal program, the federal service that authorizes this and that enables the cross communication among jurisdictions through this wrap back service is such that it's reporting back to the agency. So it would report back to DDS. It would not be a report back to the limo company.
That's right.
But what this does is allows the state to have real-time data so that if the license needs to be revoked, and of course the agency has put forth those policies either by statute or by a regulation, then that would provide you the information real time, would allow you to make the necessary decision as soon as possible, so obviously to avoid public harm.
Right. That's correct.
So
Yes, sir.
just to be clear, that it would not report back to a private company like Uber or Lyft or something like that. Is that fair to say, Neil? And okay. All right. Good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Welcome.
Gordon Henderson with Firefighter Standard and Training. We have statutory requirement under 2548. We actually have two different background checks. Volunteers do GCIC background checks. Anyone who's state certified, whether they are a full-time, part-time, whatever paid firefighter, or whether they're volunteer, they have to have the fingerprint background checks done. There is currently no requirement that we require any particular number of years between background checks, but the individual departments do. As a matter of fact, the department I'm from, Rome, required a GCIC background check annually. So, a lot of them do different things. When they change their status is when they have their next background check ran.
And who pays for those? Is it locally that they're paid for?
Either the local department or in some cases the individual, but we don't.
Okay.
At least not right now.
All right. Mr. Henderson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming today. Other folks, boards of education, teachers groups, any comments or thoughts from that vast local and state employer?
Angela Palm, Georgia School Boards Association. I think Mr. Chairman is very familiar with our requirements, and they were mentioned during the presentation. All employees of a local unit of administration have to be checked beginning January 2011. So doesn't matter certificated, non-certificated, they're all checked.
Okay. And then what's the recheck frequency? Is there a recheck at all?
I believe, no, just
Yeah,
the initial one.
I didn't think so. So I was.
Yeah, and if anybody was employed before 2011 that wasn't certificated, they weren't checked.
Okay. And then on those checks, who's paying for them? Is it the local?
Discretion of the board to decide which way it goes.
Okay, great. Thank you. And with a teacher shortage, it might behoove a local to not require too many out-of-pocket expenses for teachers to come on board.
Yeah, I would guess that most districts pay for it rather than having the employee do it, but I don't, the way the statute reads, it's their discretion.
Okay. Thank you, Angela. Appreciate that. Anyone else? John, you have anything from DJJ?
Yes, sir. John Smith with the Department of Juvenile Justice. We perform background checks on employees, applicants, contractors, and vendors, and then additionally volunteers in our facilities. We average about 6,000 per year, and the frequency across the board, both with our internal policy and then also with our PREA regulations, is 5 years and a renewal of every 5 years.
And is the agency paying for those renewals?
I think there's a difference depending on which background check you're looking at. The criminal justice check, I think for employees, is covered, or there's no cost to the department. There is a cost to the department to have them fingerprinted, which I believe is under $10 for that portion.
And Mr. Smith, would this be helpful to the agency if you could maintain, if GBI maintained the database and then you could have periodic real-time checks?
I think just, looking at it on the surface without getting into the weeds on it so far, I mean, I think there are certainly advantages and opportunities to kind of streamline some things with it.
What would be, how many employees do you have that are directly that directly supervise, maintain, or manage youth within the Department of Juvenile Justice?
We've performed, so again, we average 5,000 to 6,000 checks per year, but I think the actual number of, if you took a snapshot today, you'd be looking at about 3,500 positions that are both contractors with RBWOs and internal employees that have day-to-day contact with the youth.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Smith? Ms. Paul, may I ask you a question? I'm sorry, I meant to ask. What's the total number of teachers? What are the total numbers of employees, non-certificated or certificated across the state in the local units?
I'll have to find that out for you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I really don't know off the top of my head.
It's fairly significant, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Okay. If you have not had a chance to report, or you've heard these questions and you would like to follow up with us later on about that, then you've kind of heard the questions. That information will be very helpful. You can send it to either me or Courtney, and we'll take that information and try to compile it together for the committee. Questions from the committee members? Any final thoughts? I don't want to keep us any longer than we need to. So, Ms. Norris, thank you very much for your help with this, and Don, thank you very much for being here as well. Neil and Terry, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate everyone's attendance, and again, if you have follow-up questions or wish to send us some information, please do so. But if there's hearing nothing further, we'll go ahead and adjourn, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.